Lecture is called Myth, Magic and Care for the Dead, and I'm Dr. Willliam Pawlett from the University of Wolverhampton, and this is part of a general part of the Being Human Festival. So what I'm going to do today is I'm going to these are the main themes for today. So first of all, what is myth, and trying to understand what myth actually is. I think it's not easy to do that, and it's quite demanding even to think what myth is. So what is myth? What does myth actually do? One way of understanding myth is to see what it actually does. And I think that one of the key issues here is that myths deal with the problem of the origin. So the problem of the origin, the problem of the beginning, the problem of the foundation, the problem of what has to happen even before the foundation, the grounds for the foundation to begin, and then we can move on to the origin, and then we can move on to progress and change from there. So the problem of the origin, generally speaking, is how I want to approach myth. So I'll be talking a little bit about how I see myth. Then I'll go on to particular deities, particular goddesses. That's Isis, Demeter and Persephone. So Isis, the Egyptian goddess, then Demeter and Persephone, who are figures from Greek mythology, quite well-known figures from Greek mythology. And I'll argue that these figures suggest something which I've called care for the dead, a principle of care for the dead, which I think is something that's not only hugely important in mythological terms and hugely important in its influence on subsequent history and culture, but I think it's also something that we need to be aware of today, and something perhaps that we can even rediscover or think about again today, because I think we're perhaps moving into a culture where we care less about the dead, and also reciprocally, I think, connected to that, we care less about the living. So living and dead are a duality, what I'll call a duality. They imply each other. Neglect of the dead is also, in a sense, is neglect for the living too. So I think I want to make a case that care for the dead is something that we should really think about, but that we should we should think about in the current context, not just in the context of ancient mythology. So I want to talk about continue on to talking about modernity. So the condition of modern life. So the way that modern life sees death. That will be sort of coming to the end of the presentation. And then I think we have quite a bit of time, hopefully, for questions and discussion. I'm not quite sure how that will work there, because I think it will be by chat rather than verbally. But do type any questions in at any point in the session. Feel free to type in questions, queries, and I think that they'll be kind of moderated by my colleague Julian, and then I'll try to answer all of them. I'm not in any hurry to get away or anything, so I'll try to answer all of the questions that come in. Okay. So yeah, just two, I think. Yeah. So just to give some ideas of some of the thinkers that I'm interested in. I don't for perhaps I'm not quite sure the constituency of the audience, and whether they're academic audience or general audience, I'm not sure. But these are some of the figures that I've been influenced by. I'll just leave that slide up just for a second, because it won't be of interest to many people, I think. But Schelling, Durkheim, one of the leading figures in French sociology, may have heard of, and then some later philosophical thinkers. Okay, so what is myth? How do I understand myth, and why do I think myth is important? So myth seems to recount. It's difficult even to put in words, and I think that's why myth and poetry are so closely connected. But myth is about a time that's not even a time. It's a time before history. So it's a time before time. So it's a kind of non-time. So it's very paradoxical to think about what is involved with myth. So it's a non-time or pre-time or prehistory. And it's this non-time in which gods come into being. So it's very much about gods, divinities, about the sacred, and the process of them coming into being. So I'm very keen on emphasizing that I don't think that myth is just stories about gods. Myth is the process by which gods come into being. It is a process of making and marking and creating and affirming gods. And it goes myth and ritual go closely together, and together they bring about the manifestation and the worship of gods. So I want to make quite a big sort of claim for myth, and I see it in very big terms that it's a non-time where gods come into to being, and and gods disappear too, or they're transformed or they're absorbed into other figures, later figures. So it's a process of a very fertile and intense transformation to do with gods and the sacred. So we could say that myth then is a sort of zone, to put it quite sort of crudely, and it's a sort of zone between prehistory and history. Um, and even the fact that there is a zone between prehistory and history is strange. Again, a sort of paradoxical, I think. But prehistory is a strange term in itself. It means a time before time. How do we get from before time to time? How do we get from prehistory to history? Is a demanding question. And I think the answer, or one of the possible answers, is that we go through myth. So myth provides that shift from prehistory to into history. And I think that one of the things I was struck by when I was researching this was that how strange and even absurd the idea of movement from prehistory to history is without myth. You can't subtract myth, you can't take it away. The idea that like 1 second before history would be the same somehow as a million years before history, because it would all be prehistory, and time wouldn't make any sense in prehistory. So the very moment before history is somehow equivalent to millions and billions of years before history. Is really sort of mind-boggling and odd. And I think what makes myth so necessary, because myth sits in the origin. It provides the origin or foundation for the transference, for the transition from prehistory to history. And it's sort of impossible to think about the beginning of history without mythology. People who've tried to understand um, beginnings are dealing as much with myth as they are with history. Um, and many thinkers who've tried to understand the development of human societies, like Freud, for example, talk as much about myth as they do about something that's supposedly not myth, which is history or reason. So myth is very powerful in that it's in that zone in between prehistory and history. And in fact, we could say that myth enables that distinction between myth and non-myth to be made. Like history, reason itself by itself can't specify its own beginnings when it begins. It needs to define itself against something, which is it defines itself against myth. So then it looks down on myth and it sees myth as just fabrication or just images or just stories, in order that then it can position itself as the beginning of history proper and reason proper and philosophy proper. So philosophy grows out of Greek mythology, but it wants to say it's no longer mythology, it is now rational and it's historical thinking. Okay, I hope that sort of made sense. I'm going to move on. So as I say, do type away with questions. How am I doing? Keep going on here. Yeah. So some things that myth is not. So I've tried to say what I think myth is, but these are some things that I want to try to argue and insist that myth is not, in my view. So myth is not just the symbolic worship of nature. Some people have presented myth as just the symbolic form or allegorical form of nature. So there are many gods of nature. Demeter, who I'll talk about later, is a goddess of agriculture and a goddess of the corn. We have Zeus, the god of the sky. We have gods of the underworld. We have Agni in Hindu mythology, god of fire or literally fire. So there's a tendency to say that that mythology is just the symbolic worship of nature. I don't think that's true, and I'm simply following Durkheim's arguments here that that nature by itself wouldn't be able to inspire the intensity of mythology and the sacred. There's something so we experience nature, and nature can be beautiful. Nature can be unpleasant and challenging and disastrous even. But a lot of the time, nature is simply really just the background. It can feel quite boring, to use Durkheim's term. It's actually quite boring, and it's not. It's difficult to see how nature could inspire the sacred. It could inspire sacred mythology and sacred art and so on. So I think we're dealing with something that's more than just a symbolic form of nature. I think Persephone is more than just the symbolic form of spring, for example. And another thing, I don't accept the argument. So I've said it's not only the self-serving fabrications of high priests and kings. I don't doubt that there's some sense in which that mythology has been used by high priests and emperors and kings and princes and sovereigns to control people, to exploit people, to justify their position. I don't doubt that's the case. But I don't think mythology is only those things. So I've said it's not only the self-serving fabrications of high priests and kings. And the third point there, I've said it. I don't. It's not only flights of fancy of poets and writers. So poets and writers often pick up on mythological themes and rewrite them and recreate them. So Seamus Heaney have reworked the Beowulf myth, for example, and Ted Hughes the myths of Ovid. So poets are clearly drawn to myth and to rewriting of myth and representing details of myth. And I think that's an incredibly powerful literary process. But I don't think that's what myth can be reduced to. I don't think it can be reduced to the imagination of poets and writers. I think it's something more. There's something physical. There's something material about it. There's something material about the worship, and then there's something powerful and physical about the sensation of the sacred that goes beyond poetry, perhaps via poetry, but takes us beyond the idea of the writer. And the individual writer, of course, is not, the great myths don't have an author as such. They're tales which are told and retold and retold and retold without an author. They're not like the stories of an author exactly. So I think, and the fourth point there is quite similar really to the first point. But people have made this argument that somehow that mythology is just the best people could do at the time to understand nature. It was a kind of pre-science. It was a kind of over-adorned but underdeveloped pre-science, trying to explain the world around them. I don't think that's really right. Again, just following Durkheim, following Georges Bataille and others, I think there's something more powerful going on with mythology than that would suggest. So do feel free to disagree with me in the chat. So I've been so influenced by Schelling in this presentation. So Schelling suggests a kind of process of transformation. So myths dramatize and actually enact. They actually are the process of human consciousness and striving for better things, striving ultimately for God. So Schelling was a Christian of sorts, and he thought that mythology, all the mythologies of the world, ancient Greek mythology, Greek and Roman mythology, Norse mythology, all of those systems of mythology, Indian mythology, all of them were leading ultimately towards the process of ultimate revelation of God to human consciousness. And that Christianity was kind of the end point of this process. So he's making very, very, very grand claims for what's happening. But what I particularly like in Schelling is the way he writes about the process of transformation. From one god to another set of gods, to another series of gods. So the way that the Greek Titans, for example, are challenged by Zeus and eventually overthrown by Zeus. So you have phases of gods, transformations in the nature of God, and the nature of how humans see the sacred or see what's beyond them. We have in Schelling's scheme, then we have the earliest notions of divinity do seem to be bound up with nature and materiality, like so sky gods, gods of the earth. So Zeus, a god of the sky, Hades, a god of the earth, for example. Oceanus, the god of the oceans. But beyond that, and immediately there's a striving through mythology for people to reach something beyond that. So gradually, slow process, but gods begin to be seen as more ethical and more just. So the older gods, the gods that are connected to nature, are not in any way ethical. So if you know anything about the way Zeus behaves, he's clearly not an ethical god. or a god of justice. But slowly, this idea of a god who might care about human beings comes about, a god who is more spiritual than material. And these more spiritual gods banish or supplant the earlier divinities that are more material and more to do with nature. And then later still, we have gods that seem to actually be compassionate. So the idea of a compassionate god or a savior god is quite a later development in the sort of the grand scheme of mythological thinking. So I like the way Schelling looks at these transformations, and I also like the way that he insists that the in a sense a lot is changing, but in a sense something fundamental is not changing at all. So the problem of the origin is never resolved. So all of the pieces of the jigsaw, if you like, are still there. So the more destructive gods, the more amorous gods, the gods who don't care about human beings, those notions and feelings are still in content. They're still contemporary. They're still now. We still have those now, and they even have a place, in the traditions of Christianity and Islam and so on. Obviously, the sort of devil trickster figures, for example, are barriers, obstacles to the way that life should be and should unfold. So the origin is never supplanted. The origin is never overcome. That's what I particularly like in Schelling's work. And I think we can look at political events today, quite recent events even, about how important and powerful myths and the origin actually still are. So the problem of the origin is never resolved, according to Schelling. So myths, then, the process of myths, different myths, recount something being overcome and banished, earlier gods being banished, gods being seen as demons and being rejected, being cast out or forgotten or banished to the underworld. The things which can't be given a place in history or in community or in culture, that can't be given a place there, are banished. And there often are links to nature or to what is being designated as nature in the mythical process. So the mythical process, going through the mythical process, the mythological, historical processes, it creates this idea of nature. And nature is associated more with some gods than other gods. And the gods that, like Medusa, for example, that represent a kind of untamed wild nature, the Furies as well in Greek mythology, those are subdued or they're overcome or they're cast aside, or they're sanitized. And then what is left is what we would then call nature. So the way that modern people talk about nature is that already sanitized by that process of by the myth, what Schelling calls the mythological process, which is partly why we don't really like. We keep parts of nature distant from us. We want to embrace nature. We have a romantic view of nature, but we also have a very exploitative relationship with nature because we're dealing with something that we have ourselves constructed, which is this sanitized form of understanding of the world, which we call nature. If that makes sense, that's Schelling's view. So the rejected or inadmissible aspects of that become nature live on in our imagination and our unconscious. They feed notions of the uncanny, of a sort of primordial evil, something at the origin of things that won't really go away, and it does never go away. So we still have those ideas of the kind of uncanny origins, things that have been forgotten, things that we aren't really sure what they are, but they are still with us. And here are some examples of just Schelling himself, I believe he coined the term uncanny. He certainly used the word uncanny, and Freud sort of borrowed the idea borrowed the idea of the uncanny from Schelling. Something that is has been revealed that should have stayed hidden is the way that Schelling defines the uncanny. There's something about Medusa, then, for example, the head of Medusa, the figures of horror. Something that's not really surprising because it's something that's been there from the origin, but it's something that we don't want to face. It's a part of nature we can't face. The first image there is a ceramic of the monster Typhon. Some people say that comes just from Python, and I'm not sure about that. There's like a large snake, a powerful serpent who is attacking Zeus. So Zeus is the supreme god there of the sky, and he's using a sickle or a dagger to fight off Typhon. It doesn't look like he's got much chance really, but the mythological system that we have is that Zeus overcomes Typhon. So Zeus is overcoming the wildness of nature here, the wild, unusable, dangerous, unimaginable force of nature has to be subdued for human civilization to begin. Here, Zeus is subduing it, killing it, banishing it, or whatever, and that allows a subdued form of nature that's suitable for human beings to grow and human civilization to grow. That's the sort of argument that Schelling makes. Of course, devils, demons. We've got the Goya painting of the devil there and his followers, and I think and the Rubens painting of the head of Medusa. I think that looks like Bosch to me. I'm sorry, I should have checked, but I think that looks like a Bosch image. So monstrous figures of nature, nature being reconstituted as something manageable, something exploitable by rejecting figures like Typhon. Hence I'm kind of like suggesting that Typhon perhaps is more than the equal of Zeus there. Like the Zeus killing Typhon is like perhaps the beginning of the kind of lethal exploitation of nature. Perhaps the mythical beginning, we could put it like that. Okay. So just perhaps briefly, I think I'm going on a bit too long, but for Schelling, we have that mythology produces necessary adversaries, necessary dualities. There has to be a devil for God to overcome properly in Christ, for example. There has to be a Set or Sutek or Typhon who enables Horus to become a fully ethical god. So Horus is not really fully ethical until he overthrows Set, and so he learns that he's going to help human beings set up their world by overthrowing Set. And similar other examples we could use there from Greek mythology. And I don't mean to belittle religion by saying it's mythology, because I'm talking about mythology in the biggest and most powerful sense. So I tend to see religion and mythology as quite closely connected, but I don't mean to thereby be downgrading the importance of religion. So the final example there, the overthrow of Baal or Beelzebub, the Lord of the Flies. But it allows Jehovah to become increasingly ethical and keep increasingly caring, according to Schelling's argument, anyway. Okay, so nope, it's gone wrong there. I would like to move that out of my way if I could. Okay, so moving on to Isis and Osiris then. So moving on to Greek mythology. Sorry, I've got a thing in the way on my screen. So Osiris then is the Egyptian god of the underworld and of the dead. So an interesting figure insofar as he promises immortality. He holds out this possibility of immortality for humans, so overcoming death. So it's a very important moment in the history of mythology. The fact that humans could achieve immortality, could overcome death. And Osiris lives in the underworld, so it's not yet hell. It's not understood as hell, but he has this ability to judge humans, to judge the soul, to judge the truth, and then confer immortality. And so here then we're dealing specifically with Egyptian mythology and the idea of death. That's what I want to sort of draw out. But I want to particular emphasis Isis, the wife of Osiris. So Osiris is tricked by his jealous brother Set. They're jealous about a woman or a goddess. I think that's the spark of jealousy. So Set firstly imprisons Osiris and then later tears him apart, kills him. And Isis, I think, I've chosen as a very interesting figure to do with death and the care of the dead, because Isis, who's the wife of Osiris, searches for his body, searches high and low for his body, and it's been thrown all over the place. And she finds every part of the body. In the earlier myths, she finds every part of the body. It buries each part of it. Gives him a proper funeral. So it's this idea of valuing someone enough to give them a funeral that interests me. and when she does this, Osiris is actually resurrected, comes back to life, and he and Isis give birth to Horus, and it's Horus who finally, the god Horus, who finally overcomes Set, and imprisons him. So he's not completely annihilated; he's just imprisoned. So the origin, the dangerous origin, the primeval origin, is not destroyed; it still stays with us. So there's something about the Isis figure that I wanted to really emphasize. It's really, I've got annoying dialogue box on my screen. Can I just
Move it to the right.
can't get it to move at the moment. There it is. Yeah. So Isis then is associated with grieving and with mourning. So she's mourning the death of her husband, and she then uses, or it becomes in later myths, legends, associated with the power to heal and to preserve the body, and and the whole science, the whole practice of mummification comes from this story. So she's a master of preservation, so much so that Osiris actually comes back to life. But it's really the grieving and the mourning process, collecting the body parts and enabling a funeral that I really wanted to emphasize. So we could say that then that Osiris is a kind of judge. So he judges and weighs the souls of human beings and decides whether they're worthy of immortality or not. So Osiris tends to reward kings and nobles with immortality. So it's not a democratic process by any means. It's reflective of the aristocratic system. It is the kings, it's the rich, the super rich, we could say, who are able to buy immortality through giving gifts to Osiris. And then later that becomes increasingly more virtuous people, good people who achieve immortality. But it's never open to everybody in the Egyptian system. So I think Isis, in a sense, is a much more interesting figure in that she shows a kind of immediate unconditional care for the dead, not just not the vocation of judging the dead and trying to reestablish how worthy they are, but a much more immediate process than this kind of abstract judgment and an unconditional care for the dead is what I've to call it there. So I see. So Isis then more as why is it doing that?
Resume. Up back up. Resume.
So doing it. If I come out there.
You have come out of the presentation. No, no, just presentation.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Okay, I think I think it might have been a small hitch there. I don't know quite why that happened. Yeah, so that's what I wanted to emphasize really about Isis, this unconditional immediate care for the dead, as I've put it there. And I think there's something similar happens with later with Demeter in Greek mythology. There are other themes. There are other figures in mythology that can certainly be cited. Antigone in Greek mythology, perhaps the Virgin Mary too, in Catholicism, that dramatize. Some people would argue, for example, that Demeter is the inspiration for the Virgin Mary. That's big. That the same ideas are being reproduced later on in history. But I don't think that's right. But that has been argued. But these figures dramatize an immediate care for the dead that surpasses the male divinities who seem to be judging, separating, administering, controlling. So I want to contrast really the role of Isis and the role of Osiris here. And I've got an image there. I think it's from the Louvre of Anubis and Thoth, the Greek gods, working for Osiris, and they're judging, literally weighing the soul of man. I believe the idea of the soul is very much more very complex in Egyptian mythology. It's not just one thing. It's at least three things, if not more. But that, in any case, they're weighing the worth of the dead. So they're calculating. So Thoth is the god of writing and recording and archiving. So this idea of a kind of holding human beings to account and judging their value. This seems to have the origins of this idea, a very powerful symbol of this idea with the Osiris cult. So it opens up the prospect of immortality, the conquest of death, which maybe arguably is at the heart of many religions. But we could also argue, I think, that Isis is doing something much more compassionate and much more instructive, perhaps much more vital for later human experience. She's not judging which members of the rich and powerful are allowed immortality, as Iris is. And what is the implication of that? If the rich and powerful kings, queens, monarchs are able to achieve immortality simply by being kings and queens and monarchs, because the idea of justice is implicit in their role, so that they get granted the afterlife. So I think that there's something quite dangerous and destructive in this idea, because what does that do to death for ordinary people who can't, provide gold for the ferryman or gifts or funeral gifts to pay Osiris for their immortality. So it tends to maybe reduce the meaning of death for the majority, and perhaps feeds and amplifies this idea that the modern idea that death is meaningless for the majority. And I think we still have this kind of power imbalance, this class or power structure in modernity, very much so. Perhaps you could even say it's being revived, or it's becoming more powerful. So the amount of grieving and mourning that is associated with the powerful, the rich, the royal family, and so on. I don't begrudge them that, but my concern is that ordinary people aren't given those sorts of honors, and it's almost like they have a lesser death. And I think that that notion can perhaps be traced back here to Osiris. Right. Okay, so I'm going to move on. I think I'm probably going way over, but I'm going to move on to Greek mythology in a moment. And before we do that, I just wanted to just share this image here, which I found really amazing. It's a painting of these three figures: Isis, so Isis, the Egyptian goddess we've just been talking about, with Moses associated with the beginnings of Judaism, monotheism, and receiving the word of God and so on, and then Hermes, who Hermes is a Greek god, but he's also known in Egyptian mythology. And I just chose it because I just wanted to suggest how overlapping these traditions actually are. So there's a tendency to see everything in historical terms, and Schelling does this perhaps too much himself, even though I've borrowed his insights a lot. But there is a kind of an overlapping as well. It's not like there was one thing and then another. There was like polytheism, then there was monotheism. That's not the case. There's incredible overlaps between different religious and mythological traditions. So moving on to the Greek figures then, Demeter and Persephone. So Demeter, Demeter there, searching, mourning, grieving for her lost daughter Persephone. So Persephone, Demeter, sorry, a goddess of crops, of harvest, a goddess of fertility, celebrated at harvest time, harvest festivals. Presents us with another image of care for the dead. So it seems like, according to Schelling and other people, that she's the kind of archetype of the suffering deity. So this is quite a remarkable development or transformation so far as now deities themselves suffer, not just human beings, while the gods have a great time. on Mount Olympus or whatever, do as they please. But now that deities themselves are suffering, of course, the suffering deity, the suffering God, the suffering king is, of course, reappears in Christianity. Um, so a new idea, a new archetype of the suffering deity. So she's a divinity, but she's lost her daughter Persephone. According to some of the myths, has been out actually painting flowers or creating the possibility of color in nature. So Persephone, a divinity, of course, in her own right, doing an amazing thing, actually creating nature, creating the appearance of nature, creating the colors of nature. And was spotted doing this by Hades, Lord Hades, Lord of the Dead, taken away, stolen away into the underground, into the underworld. Sorry, and this provides the story of the fertility of spring and summer, and then Demeter eventually bargains through Zeus to have Persephone released from the underworld for it varies, but sometimes it's 3 months in the underworld, sometimes 4 months in the underworld, and the rest of the time she's able to come back to her mother, come back out into the world, and that so winter is when Persephone is no longer painting nature, no longer painting flowers and making things beautiful. The interesting thing here, I think, is that Persephone and Demeter both know death. We could say they know death. So Persephone knows death in the sort of in the double sense, in the carnal sense too. She knows of death. She's a divinity who knows of death. She's not a typical immortal deity. She knows death very intimately, and Demeter too is very closely connected with death, going into the underworld, searching the underworld. But also, while she's searching for Persephone, she neglects to fertilize the earth, so the earth dies too. So there's a danger that mortals will die because the magical growth of nature is not happening because Demeter is no longer doing this, performing this magic because she's so concerned about where Persephone is. So death is very, very much implied in this legend. And so that's why I want to link it to the idea of death and care for the dead, and link that to the modern world, the contemporary world. And here is another really beautiful image of Persephone, sometimes called Kore. Kore, but they're both from Greek, both Greek names for this figure, Persephone. Usually Persephone, I think, but Kore, which I think means virgin or unmarried girl or something like that in Greek. And sometimes Kore is the name used for Persephone before she's carried away by Hades. At least some of the time, that's how it works. So painting there, and an Italian philosopher, Agamben, has recently written a book about Kore stroke Persephone, just emphasizing how she's this really incredible figure, unspeakable girl. He uses this quotation from the old. It's actually lost. It's a lost manuscript that he claims to know about. So where he takes the word, I was going to give you the reference, but there is no reference because it's a lost manuscript. But the unspeakable God. So she's unspeakable in the sense that she is part of an irresolvable duality. She's both life and death. She's both virgin and wife. She's both material and spiritual. She has magical properties. She's responsible for the beauty of nature and for the increasing ethical. The reason that Demeter agrees to start to recommence fertilizing the earth as well. So she's spanning all of these dualities. She's as much life as she is death. She literally lives in with death. She's married to death. Yet she's also incredibly alive and full of life force, creating the blooming of nature in the spring. So I'm sort of guaranteeing that nature comes back the following spring. Yeah. Okay, so right. So I've got my thing in the way again. Just let it go. There it is. Okay, so Demeter and Persephone, or Kore, associated with the Eleusinian mystery cult. So this is a mystery cult about concerning being initiated into the worship of Demeter, and it was one of the most powerful cults for many centuries in ancient Greece, and I think it was one of the last to really sort of fade away, the last to even to be sort of persecuted by the Christian emperors, and lasted into the Christian era anyway. So the initiates, it seems from the records that initiates could be drawn from any class. They're able to go forward and to be initiated into this ultimate mystery, into the highest truth, and that Demeter is associated then with the highest truth of human existence, the highest truth of life. And of course, nobody knows what the highest truth is because it's secret, and it's just for the it's just for the initiates to know that. But there have been many speculations about what the highest truth is. For some people, it's the necessary interpenetration of life and death. Life and death are not separable. Life is death. Death is life. They imply each other. They can't be separated. They're equal partners. Maybe that's the highest truth. Maybe Demeter and just the power of the feminine power of fertility is the highest truth. For Schelling, not surprisingly, perhaps for Schelling, the highest truth is that that's revealed in this mystery cult is that we no longer need the Greek gods at all, and we're ready to move on to the Christian God. We're ready to move away from the pagan superstition to the Christian God. That's Schelling's view, but Schelling again sees this moment, the cult of Demeter and Persephone is absolutely vital to world history, to the edges of the world. And more recently, Giorgio Agamben has argued that, rather sort of surprisingly perhaps, that the highest truth that was revealed is that there is no highest truth. There just isn't a highest truth. Or the highest truth is that we have to find for ourselves what we want to do and what we think and what we believe. It's up to us. So in a sense, there's kind of the deepest secret of Demeter and Persephone is that there is no deep secret. It's just life. So yeah, different accounts then of what this deep or highest, greatest truth actually is. Yeah. And that's more or less what I've already said. I've anticipated the the next slide, I think. The different understanding. So for Schelling, yeah, that's it's the highest point of kind of spiritual development, care for her daughter, doing anything to find and recover her daughter under any deal. She agrees that Hades has the right to keep her for 3 or 4 months because she has eaten the pomegranate seed, so she's part of that world. That can't be undone. But Demeter eagerly anticipates her return each spring and is joyful. And that joy, the joy of Persephone's return, is the joy of spring. As I say, that for Schelling, this is the beginning of the shift to the revealed truth of Protestant theology. But without in any way sort of wanting to, I don't kid myself that I'm challenging Schelling or anything like that, but I just want to pick up a different sort of understanding of Protestant theology than Schelling has. So Protestant theology is also the springboard for capitalist modernity, and in capitalist modernity, Protestant work ethic, etc. Protestant modernity presents a new understanding of death. So I just want to say a little bit, if I've got time, just a little bit about this new understanding of death that I've called, associated with capitalist modernity. I think I've said that already. So, probably everyone's heard of the Protestant work ethic, Max Weber's famous essay, Protestant Work Ethic. So, the Protestant work ethic is very closely associated with the Protestantism that Schelling is promoting. Although I don't want to as I say, I don't want to sort of taint him with with later development or anything like that. But the Protestant work ethic, I think, introduces quite a quite a new, a bizarre new situation because, in a sense, with the Protestant, in Protestantism, it's particularly in the stricter, more Puritan forms of Protestantism, which is my own personal background. So I kind of feel licensed to challenge this background since it's my own background. There's no direct access to the divine. There's no mystical access to the divine. There's no way to earn salvation. If anyone's ever studied Max Weber for A-level sociology or degree in sociology, there's no the way to earn salvation through earthly acts. There's a principle of predestination. So either you're one of the saved or you're not. So the only strategy really that's available is to struggle on, obediently toil in life, and present to wider society the external image of a righteous person, a good person, to act as if you think or hope that you're one of the saved. Not even to believe it, not even to be certain you're one of the saved, because that can be seen as sinful, particularly in the more, as I say, the more Puritan branches of Protestantism. You have to get on with work, get on with your work. Essentially, you have to get on with your work, and if you get on with your work enough, and are diligent enough, maybe then you will be rewarded, but you can't ever know that. And I think this view of death, we could link it right back to the Osiris myth, about being judged, who is judged to be worthy of death, of resurrection, rather, who is worthy of immortality and who is not worthy. It's picking up on that. I think it takes that as the Osiris rather than the Isis uh, um, line of development that I wanted to talk about. So I wanted to contrast Isis to Osiris. So I think there's a link back to Osiris. I've somehow skipped over a very nice image of I think, have I? I'm not sure, but I'll have a look in a minute. Okay, so are we still in this situation now then? Are we still in this Protestant work ethic situation where there's really no access to the divine? There's no access to a myth is downgraded to a kind of storytelling, and mysticism is frowned upon. There's no direct access to the divine, and we show our sanctity only through work, which is, of course, the fertile condition for the growth of capitalism. So capitalism and the Protestant work ethic that's the Weber's thesis that the Protestant work ethic is the trigger for capitalism in parts of Britain, parts of Holland, and parts of Germany, and so on. So we could argue, and I'm influenced by Jean Baudrillard, French theorist, that what we've got here is not only have we got a kind of new and unmanageable understanding of death, where we can't ever know about salvation or immortality. They've been sort of mooted, promised, or whatever, but that's been taken away, and that's some people are predestined for salvation, others aren't. No one can know who is who. But that has a horrible kind of backlash or repercussions. So work becomes a kind of living death. Baudrillard calls work a living death, and it's full of unrecognized sacrifices. So we make all these sort of sacrifices for work, and so the idea of death and sacrifice are very, very implicit in the sort of secular working world. We just don't recognize them normally, or they are not recognized. So and we have a view of the view of death that goes with this, which is that sickness and decline and then death are seen really as embarrassments. They're embarrassments for the family, for those involved. Or the sort of awkward breaks in workflow and in productivity. They get in the way of capitalism. People are embarrassed enough to say. People are expected to get over bereavement very, very quickly, just like an afternoon maybe, and get back to work. So death here I'm linking to modernity, to capitalist modernity in particular. Retirement is this beginning of unproductivity, this terrible sin, if you like, of being unproductive, or not achieving the sort of workflow that is expected of you. And retirement becomes akin to almost like the first step into death. So like the death is the next step after retirement, kind of a linear process that hides the way that life and death imply each other and implicate each other. Increasingly, as many people have argued, Philip Aries and John Baudrillard and others, the dying are segregated, and the dead are then segregated because they're pushed, or they're no longer buried in villages or in the center of a village. They're pushed to out of town cemeteries and facilities. The process of dying is medicalized. It's hidden from the family and from the person who's dying through medical techniques. And then we have now increasingly popular, I think, direct cremation. So cremation. So after death, then no funeral as such, no grieving, no mourning process as such. I mean, or they're kind of optional, but they're not part of the actual designated direct cremation process. So, what is the view of death in modernity? What is the view of death in capitalist modernity? What is the view of death now? It's still kind of rooted in myth. I think it's rooted back in the Osiris myth, and then the segregation of death and the power for having a different sort of quality of death and as well as quality of life. As I said at the beginning, the two are always connected. So quality of death and quality of life are very closely connected, and people with the highest quality of life also are conferred the highest quality of death. So, and I've just chosen a couple of images here that I think sort of perhaps what I'm getting at, or what a bit have been on my mind when I was writing this. So I don't know if people know the film Children of Men, 2006 film based on the P.D. James novel of the same title, Children of Men. And it has one of the most disturbing scenes, I think, for me in the film is that the government are pushing home suicide kits. So in the background, you see TV screens and the billboard screens and things pushing the quietus, if that's how you pronounce it, I think from Hamlet. Widely, I only know it from Hamlet, but the suicide kits are being pushed by the government. They're distributed free, so anyone can apply for a home suicide kit. And life is very tough. It's unpleasant. The birth rate has declined to 0 in Children of Men in the story, and the government is just pushing suicide as a way of just saying like, okay, it's not very nice, but take this way out, take an easy way out with a home suicide kit. And there's a slogan, a very suggestive slogan on the advertisement. I don't know if you probably can't see it on my image, but it says "illegals welcome." So it's clearly also about migration, fears of migration. Very topical, very current. And so illegal immigrants are being told that they are welcome to apply for a free suicide kit because the government is quite happy for those people to commit suicide, no longer be a management issue for them. And I've also got the suicide pod or sarcopod there. People have probably seen this before. I don't know a huge amount about it. I think I probably should try do more research on this. But Swiss made, as I understand it, euthanasia device, created by 3D printer, can be operated by just the one person who wants to end their life. To call it a suicide pod, of course, is loading the issue in particular way. So sarcopod, let's call it sarcopod as they prefer. Apparently they have been used, and they're designed to cause death by asphyxiation in a painless way, a form of euthanasia. Euthanasia, of course, means a good death. It means a good death, positive death. But yeah, you do have to sort of wonder for who it's positive. So I'm certainly not condemning euthanasia or people's choices. I'm not thinking about the level of individual choice here. I'm thinking about the level of culture and the sort of culture that we live in, the capitalist modernity that we live in, and how it views and understands death, and how it values or doesn't value death and the life and death of certain people more than others, and other people less so, both in terms of life and death, which I'm arguing are intimately connected. I don't know what the latest legal situation is. I don't know if I think I thought they were illegal, the sarcopods. Now I've heard that they might not be. I think the process is still rumbling on. I believe one was used recently and didn't work very well. That's been reported. Okay. Okay, final point, because I think feels like I've been talking for a very, very long time. But the final point I wanted to make today, and I hope you're still there, I hope you're still with me, is that I'm just aware that the understanding of death is changing all the time, of course. It's not fixed in modernity, and it's changing. There are all sorts of attempts happening to kind of improve on or ameliorate or the situation we're in, and maybe to understand life and death in a different way or more positive way, or try to allow people to think how life and death are so closely connected and not segregate death in quite the same way. All sorts of initiatives are taking place. Some of them I've looked at in not in a huge amount of detail, but my feeling is that that they don't always touch on the heart of the problem or the fundamentals of the problem or the origins of the problem. That's why I'm interested in mythology, because I think it gets really back to the origins of the problem. And so it's become commonplace to say that we must recognize that death is just part of life. For example, that death's not this terrifying, incredibly awful, unspeakable thing. It's just part of life. But to say just part of life, it tends to it isn't just part of life. That still gives life the power to subordinate death, saying it's just like, oh, death is just this regrettable sort of part of life that we sometimes have to deal with. I don't think some of these phrases and ideas I don't really think that they're leading us into a better situation. I could put it in that way, I think. So people also talk about breaking the taboo on death, as if that would again be a great positive if people could talk more about death. Or I'm not sure what people mean by taboo when they say that, because taboo has a long history of being used in social anthropology, which I've tried to sort of look at. But I think I get the broad sense of what people mean by that, meaning that death shouldn't be hidden by silence, for example. It shouldn't be hushed, shouldn't be treated in hushed tones. And I think there's a danger there. There's something I don't find really quite convincing there either, that silence and death, the way they go together, and they've gone together in mythology for a very long time. Mourning, grieving, silence, I think are very important processes that we should keep hold of and should acknowledge. And the danger with some of these strategies might be that we're sort of further opening life and death up to a capitalist agenda, sort of get on with it agenda, like death's nothing special, just get on with it. Just the rest of the family get back to work. Don't dwell on it. Don't grieve. Don't mourn. So for me, it's the process of grieving and mourning is something that's really important, and I've looked at in Freud and Bataille. It's something sort of unique to humans. Well, in the sense that actually it's not unique to humans, but it's something that is discussed by Bataille in terms of it being unique to primates anyway. So it's not unique to humans, but it's something it's very, very old. It's something that's very central to what would later become human civilization. Mourning and grieving, and I think if mourning and grieving are squeezed and no longer encouraged, I think there's something very dangerous in that. And I think that's kind of can be seen in terms of just the extension of capitalism. That's something which is something I not in favor of. I mean the extension across limits of capitalism. So notions of being death positive again, I think that's almost like what's wrong with recognizing the negativity of death. Can we say let's just be positive or something? I'm not sure. But my fear is that therapeutic approaches to death tend to limit grieving and mourning, to see grieving and mourning as not right or as dangerous or as pathological or as too demanding or too stressful. And therefore those things can get squeezed. And what are they replaced by? They're replaced by the pressure to get back into work and to be a productive citizen. Again, that's my fear, really. Again, I'm talking very much on a hugely broad cultural level. Of course, I'm not criticizing people who have found, particular death positive ideas helpful. Of course, I've got nothing against that. But I think the concern I have is in losing grieving, mourning, no longer recognizing those things.